So that was the very first repetition, obviously, that we needed to give any corrections for regarding this sit. And obviously a car making a lot of noise, you could tell a little bit distracted there. So again, it's not just about giving the command. A lot of people will say, well, my dog knows sit, down, stay. You know, I use the sit to do it. It's not about asking the command. It's not about if the dog is compliant. Sometimes it's about in the moments when the dog is not compliant, are your foundations of the commands sound enough where you can enforce it in a clear and concise way? That is the recipe. When I say the foundations of commands, it is really about when we ask the command, how do we either reinforce the behavior when done properly or hold the dog accountable when done improperly, obviously. Okay. Without that, your commands are simply party tricks. All right, guys, David with Miracle Canine. We got Bean here. Bean is here for some boarding. I believe this is actually Bean's very first boarding stay with us since his training program that he's been going through with Michelle. I don't know this dog at all, but he's here for boarding, which means that he gets boarding enrichment exercises. So a lot of times when we get a brand new dog that comes into the facility for boarding, what I like to do when I first get them out is take them through some basic skills to kind of assess where they're at with things. Those skills can involve leash walking, obviously. Those skills can involve basic commands and general compliance of those. Those skills can involve socialization, handling, all of those types of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through those steps one at a time. We're going to kind of start working his little noodle here, seeing where he's at with all of that training and using that as an opportunity to kind of get him engaged during the boarding stay here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a walk, and we are going to take a look at where he's at with it, and we'll kind of plug away from there. Bean, come. So one thing that we do in our training program is we kind of cater it and outline it in a way where it could easily be replicated from person to person. So once the dog understands their core fundamental skills, which any dog going through boarding with us will have gone through enough training to be able to understand those things, basically as long as the handler understands the language of the dog, meaning the ability to ask a command and enforce a command in a clear and concise way, virtually anybody should be able to grab the leash and almost immediately be able to begin asking the dog to do things for them, and the dog should be able to understand it. So we put a lot of focus on both the dog side of things as well as the human side of things. We hear all the time from clients that they have a dog that may have done a board and train program or done one-on-ones with somebody else, and all of the focus was initially put on just the training of the dog, which is an important piece. It's 50% of the equation, obviously. But then once that dog goes home, the owners have no idea how to upkeep that training because the language is not there with them. So by focusing on both ends of the spectrum here, we could kind of ensure that we're going to get long results, as well as a dog that's going to listen to anybody that we need them to listen to, assuming they understand the basic language with things. So that's why I'm able to jump right into things, work on leash walking skills, and ensure that obviously Bean is going to listen to me as I do those types of things. On that note, it's really important to note that, you know, your dog's training is only ever going to be as good as the competency level of the handler that is with the dog. One thing that I would say frustrates me beyond belief is when I hear from clients that, you know, maybe have historically used another boarding kennel in the past or another daycare kennel in the past or a vet or any of the above. And those individuals will say, you know, kick out the dog from their program or not allow them back or say things like, your dog can't come back to board here until they've gone through training elsewhere. And obviously, in theory, I understand they want the dog to be more well-behaved, obviously. They want the dog to have more skills on them. But we'll even hear that consistently with dogs after they've gone through training, where they basically imply that the dog should have more training on them because it's the dog's responsibility to just behave themselves. And that's so faulty because we get dogs in all the time, and we have dogs that come here that I know without a question of a doubt at home are pushing their owner's boundaries. They're not listening as well as they should. The owner may not be practicing things as well as they should be practicing them. And I always say what the owner is doing at home has almost zero impact on how well the dog will behave with me at the training facility. And that's because, again, I understand the general principles of communicating with the dog. I understand the human side of the equation of how to communicate with the dog. So just because one individual isn't doing it doesn't mean another cannot. So keep that in mind when you're looking at boarding kennels, when you're looking at daycare kennels, is no matter how well trained your dog is, If the other individual doesn't know how to upkeep that training or utilize that training, it's going to seem as if the dog has had no training before in general. So you can see Bean here, obviously, definitely pushing the boundaries a little bit, definitely trying to forge ahead a little bit. And that could be because, obviously, he has a blurred expectation at home, so I'm kind of redefining those boundaries for him. That could be he's just kind of testing to see what he can get away with me. But ultimately, because I am consistent about how I'm enforcing this expectation, I will continue to see this improve over the course of this walk, and that I need to correct less and less. You could already see after a couple, and even with getting spooked by some of the traffic, that he's starting to maintain much more attention on me, matching my pace a lot more. When I slow down, he's slowing down with me. Another variable too is obviously we're located like right in the heart of Cleveland, so there's a ton of traffic. It's a very busy area, and we have a lot of clients that drive from the suburbs to come here, so sometimes the dogs just frankly aren't used to this degree of distraction unless they come here, obviously. Good job, buddy. All right, so once we've had a chance to look at the leash walking and assess where that is, unless there's any major holes that need to be worked on, which we're not seeing, obviously a little bit of forging ahead, but seemed to get better as the walk went on, and something that as we continue doing this over the next few days that he's boarding with us, again, we will continue to see move on. We move to our next command, so basic stability of something like a sit-stay. So that's gonna be the next thing that I work on here, is I'm gonna assess where he's at with his stationary command. So I'll go ahead and pick a spot, sit. Good job. Okay, and I'll work a bunch of sits here. Sit. Good. Okay. Sit. Good job. Okay. Sit. Okay. Sit. Okay. Sit. Now, an interesting thing to note is you notice how he's getting into the down position. So in our one-on-one program, in our board and train program, we put almost 100% of our emphasis into a down stay with the dogs. Now, that said, the reason why I'm choosing to work a sit and being lenient of if he further stabilizes into the down, accepting that, is because there are some dogs that come through our program that before we get to the down, we proof the sit stay first as just a means of gaining some stability out of the dog. So instead of right away asking an expectation that he may not be elevated enough or advanced enough through his program in order to understand, I'm starting with a more simple one to gauge where he's at with his stationary command. And then from there, if I determine that he's just offering downs consistently, that lets me know that our trainers have in fact worked that down stay and put the emphasis into it, and I can switch my expectation to that. And again, the reason why I'm okay with a dog going from a sit to a down, but not something like a dog going from a down to a sit when I ask a stationary command, is because when a dog is going from a sit to a down, they are further stabilizing into position. They are not being defiant. They are not maybe a little bit too distracted or anything like that. They are stabilizing more so than we are actually even asking them to, which I don't want to discourage that effort. In the case of asking a down out of a dog and them just going into a sit, that's telling me they're not stabilizing enough, which is a sign that they may be a little bit too distracted or not geared in enough to what it is that I'm asking of them. Okay. Sit. I always, when I ask the command, even if they are sitting, but itching, stuff like that, I always wait for complete stability before moving on to the next thing. So something like that. Okay. I'll do a few more of these. Sit. Okay. Sit. Okay. Sit. Okay. Sit. Beautiful. So clearly, Bean is not having a hard time with stabilizing into the position when asked. I don't think I needed to correct one time for any of those. So once I've checked that box, we move on then to the next thing. So everything's working as prerequisites here, obviously. And the next thing would be asking some basic duration out of Bean. So what I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to walk to a spot, sit. I'll ask that sit command, Again, if he stabilizes into the down, no big deal. Once he fully stabilizes, I'm just going to start walking around holding the leash, ensuring that obviously he's maintaining position nicely, being very mindful that I'm not tugging on the leash or doing anything that might cause him to get up. Okay. Sit. Again, each time asking the command, waiting for stability before I start walking around. Again, you see Bean further stabilizing there, totally allowing that. That is something I will never understand when I see trainers get on, is when they further stabilize and they correct them and say, no, I asked for sit. In the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The stationary command, we exclusively use to keep the dog in one spot. So if they are more comfortable and more stable in that down position, why would we discourage that? Okay. Sit. Good job, buddy. Okay. Sit. Okay. We'll do one more of those. Sit. Again, using this as a prerequisite, I'm going to work this until it is virtually perfect, which is just about where we're at right now. Okay. Again, keep in mind, I have never worked this dog before. The only reason why I'm able to communicate so effectively with the dog is because he understands the language and I understand the language of how to communicate in general. Sit, how to give a command and enforce a command. Waiting for full stability. Next, I'm going to add in setting the leash down, walking just a couple feet away, coming back, picking up that leash. There are many things that could trigger a dog to get up, one of which is picking up the leash, so we want to assess where he's at with that and how much work we may have done with that already. Okay. Sit. Further stability. Okay. Sit. Okay. Sit. No. Sit. So that was the very first repetition, obviously, that we needed to give any corrections for regarding this sit. And obviously a car making a lot of noise, you could tell a little bit distracted there. So again, it's not just about giving the command. A lot of people will say, well, my dog knows sit down, stay. You know, I use the sit to do it. It's not about asking the command. It's not about if the dog is compliant. Sometimes it's about in the moments when the dog is not compliant, are your foundations of the commands sound enough where you can enforce it in a clear and concise way? That is the recipe. When I say the foundations of commands, it is really about when we ask the command, how do we either reinforce the behavior when done properly or hold the dog accountable when done improperly, obviously. Okay? Without that, your commands are simply party tricks. So next up, we would do the exact same thing with our bed command, which is our more indoor stability position. Bed. So I would follow the same steps of getting onto command initially. Okay. And doing those until they're 99% good. Bed. Okay. From there, I would add in my short duration bed, ensuring that once in position, they understand to stay there until told otherwise. Okay. Bed. Okay. And then bed. Ensuring when put into position, once the leash is dropped, they understand to stay there until told otherwise, regardless of what is going on. So whether that's the door opening, whether that's me just walking away, whether it's another dog coming by, any of those types of things. Okay. Come. Doorway manners are obviously a big one that we test. Making sure when put in that come command, once that gate is open, that they understand to stay with us. Come. As opposed to fly through the door. Good job. Come. Good job. Come. And then last but not least, what we will test with them is their social ability. Sociability with other dogs. And a lot of times with the socialization, we'll start one-on-one. We'll kind of assess how they are with a dog that, isn't going to be overly in their face necessarily, but will still help to push them out of their shell a touch if they are a bit shy like a dog like Bean is. So Capone obviously is a good dog for that. Very playful, rambunctious, but also takes cues very well. Malinois that we have that comes here all the time. A very submissive little guy, you could see. You can tell based on the squeaks and the frantic movements and stuff like that, Bean is not used to handling this kind of energy, obviously. So there's nothing aggressive about it. Very submissive, frankly, with the constant rolling over and things like that. But nonetheless, needs to kind of learn how to manage different types of energy when socializing with other dogs. Because the problem is what we're seeing right now, very submissive, but also very squeaky, very prey-like. You see how obviously Bean is kind of instigating the chase, making noises similar to, obviously when a dog is playing with a squeaky toy, or, frankly, when you have animals that catch other animals like squirrels or bunnies or any of those types of things. So with the wrong dog, if you have the wrong type of energy you're putting this with, that could turn into a big problem. That could obviously instigate for another dog to go after them. So you have to be mindful of these types of things when you're socializing your young dogs. Again, you see Capone is being very respectful of it. He is chasing a little bit. You can see a little bit of that kind of prey drive out of him, obviously. He's being very respectful once he gets close. No. Too much. So a lot of that is trying to control that spastic energy. You notice he didn't do anything. He wasn't biting. His mouth wasn't even on Bean there. But that whole, like, put the body on top of and try to stabilize and control. That's what you were seeing right there, obviously. And though he wasn't doing anything inherently wrong necessarily, it's too much. We want him to take it down a couple notches. It's not his job to control that energy. But this is a good side lesson in just socialization in general. Is a lot of people think their dog is, you know, not an instigator or not a problem. Or this is a dog, if you took to the dog park and let's say it got attacked by another dog, because this dog is so friendly and so social, you would never think twice about, oh my gosh, like, why would my dog be the problem if, you know, they got attacked by another dog? But as I was just explaining prior to that happening, that frantic and neurotic energy for some dogs can just be such a trigger for them. If you don't have the right dog, obviously, that you have control over. So you have to be mindful of making sure that you have the ability to tone that down a little bit with the other dogs that you're working with, and you're working to improve on these dogs' social skills so they don't act that way in the first place. I talk all the time about like inner dog household aggression issues and stuff like that, like being a result of generally one dog trying to control an unstable dog. When you have people send a dog in saying this dog is attacking my other dogs in the home, they think that dog's the problem, and that dog very well may have problems that need addressed. But in many cases, when we look at the other dogs in the house, they're rehearsing unstable, frantic, neurotic energy constantly that is just making it really hard for the other dogs to succeed. So you see, obviously now, Capone is being a little bit more mindful of when this dog is running, not triggering into such a prey-driven state of mind. And again, I add the caveat that Capone is not an aggressive dog at all. I'm not concerned that Capone is going to go after this dog. But you see, he wants to control that energy, wants to control it. And again, this little guy is instigating this, right? He wants to play now, you could tell, which is why he's tearing around and doing the zoomies and stuff like that. You got to be very, very mindful of this stuff. So again, this is what we look at when we get dogs that come in that have either, let's say, been to another training company before and are here for an assessment. Generally, we would do stuff like this. Or obviously, if we have dogs that come in first-time boarders, we want to assess how they're going to respond from a standpoint of compliance, obviously, around distractions like on the walk or with their general commands, as well as with their social skills. And how we go about handling these things. And you also got a very good lesson here on, obviously, how to handle socialization, you know, and things to look for with it, because that's the ever-changing dynamic of things. So, you know, post that, when we go to do further enrichment with dogs like this, now that we have a read off of where they're at with stuff, we would look at the major problem areas. So obviously sit stays, bed stays, no problem with this dog. This dog's a cakewalk with them, obviously. But things like the socialization opened up fantastic at the end, but definitely a little shy at the beginning. And neurotic, frantic energy we want to be mindful of as we're putting him with other dogs. And then on top of that, obviously the leash walking, though was good, could use a little bit of improvement from the standpoint of distractions like loud noises and things like that. So we would isolate those things then as we move forward, try to highlight those things as their enrichment activities. And though general boarding is not for us to train the dog, obviously, they're here for boarding, we try to provide enrichment throughout their stay to make sure we're keeping the ball rolling with stuff, and that the dogs are coming home in a better spot than when they came in. That's one thing we've always prided ourselves in. So good little assessment there. All in all, that was what, 45 minutes, something like that? Nothing crazy, obviously. Now, real quick, why don't you point over to this guy? Right there, obviously we just took his buddy away. He's a little upset about it. And what did he try to do? He tried to squeeze his little freaking head through this corner and try to make a little bit of a dash for it. So we got a correction for that, obviously. General rules and boundaries on top of the basics from a training standpoint, from a socialization standpoint, as we're running these dogs, right? As we're pottying them in the yard like this, all of that type of stuff, we are enforcing the general rules, right? We're making sure there are rules and boundaries, obviously. So that was an example of that as we're wrapping it up right there. So that's a quick little glimpse into the boarding program. That's a quick little glimpse into some of the enrichment things that we like to do with these dogs. And we hope you found it beneficial.